Welcome back. Now to the Russia investigation and the one big headline that's been hanging over all others this week, and that says something. As you know, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, he reportedly wants to interview Trump, and Trump has said publicly on more than one occasion he wants to meet with Mueller, and he's even looking forward to it, and he testify under oath. But reports this week have Trump's attorneys throwing cold water on that idea. They're afraid, among other things, that the president will perjure himself or otherwise expose himself to even greater legal jeopardy. Now, those are not the kind of headlines that play well in Trump's ego. And CNN reporting that Trump is at least still saying he wants to sit with Mueller. But that same source tells CNN Trump thinks he can work this. He doesn't realize how high the stakes are. So what does this all mean for the investigation? What happens if Trump refuses to talk? For that and more, we turn once again to Roland Riopelle. Roland, a former federal prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York and the co-founder and partner at Surcars and Riopelle in the city. Roland, as always, thanks for the time. And let's gameplay this a little bit because you have competing interests. You have the ego of the president and the microphone saying, bring it on. You know, I'd love to talk to Mueller. I'll do it under oath. It'll be terrific. And I think as any good counsel would do, they look at their client and they realize his, if not tendency, near compulsion to lie or exaggerate or misstate. And that's the worst possible thing he could do, especially when you're dealing with somebody like Mueller. So if you were his attorney, and I'm sorry to do this to you in this hypothetical, but if you were, you would keep him as far away from that courtroom as possible, right?
Richard, if I were Mr. Trump's attorney, it would be time to break out those old football skills, tackle him, and make sure he stays down. Yeah, no competent attorney would encourage Mr. Trump to meet with Mr. Mueller, given his long history of prevarication. It's just not, it's a prescription for disaster. Now, do I believe Trump really thinks he can outmaneuver Mueller and his team, and do I believe Trump really wants to meet with Mueller? No. I think what Trump is doing is simply extending the process for as long as he can. He knows that delay is his friend, so that's what's really happening here.
Okay, so let's play this out, and let's say there is a subpoena that comes from Mueller's office. Mm-hmm. Now it comes to Trump, and let's say they follow your advice, scenario A, and say, yeah, no. Then that works its way through the courts. And you think even with fast-tracking this, we're talking months here before it'll be settled whether or not he's got to testify?
I think it will be months because he's going to continue to go back and forth with his own counsel in the press and go back and forth with Mr. Mueller's team for as long as possible. And when they finally get frustrated, they'll serve a subpoena. Then there'll be negotiation about when Trump might appear, and they'll stretch it out that way. And then after a few more weeks of that, they'll be, nah, we're not going to do that. He's not going to do that. He's going to assert executive privilege or some other privilege. He's not going to assert the Fifth Amendment because that would be political suicide, but he'll refuse to respond to the subpoena. And then Mr. Mueller will have to go to court to have it enforced. Trump will take an appeal. The appeal process will take more weeks or months. And by the time we finally get an answer, we'll get it maybe in time for Christmas, but not before.
So let's look at the optics and logistics of that likely scenario. The optics for the president are good, makes him look guiltier by the day. They don't want to sit down and talk and answer questions, and they're dragging this out, and the headline continues to stay there front and center. On the flip side, if you're Mueller, Roland, do you say, okay, I can still put out my obstruction report, if you will, while I still move on collusion? Or does he have to stay in a holding pattern until it's resolved one way or the other as to whether or not he'll get Trump in front of him?
You know, Mueller could do it either way. My sense is that he will be inclined to do it all at once. I don't think he'll jump the gun at this point. I think Mr. Mueller knows that delay may be in his best interest, too, if what he is really hoping for is a referral to Congress and an impeachment of the president. Keep in mind, the majority of the House of Representatives now are Republicans, And with that in place, it seems unlikely that they would vote articles of impeachment. But that may change in November. So it may be acceptable to Mr. Mueller to delay his reporting until there's a change in Congress, because he may feel that reporting even a crime against Mr. Trump at this point will not result in an impeachment proceeding.
There's also the open concern that Trump could follow his base instincts here and actually try and make a move, whether it be, as we said, on Mueller, or more indirectly on Rosenstein, put somebody else in there who'd move Mueller out. How much of a consideration does that have to be for Mueller and prosecution, that they could move to shut this whole thing down before they'll even release their reports, let alone have Trump in front of them?
I think that's something Mr. Mueller is very concerned about, and I think he's probably prepared to react to that if he sees it happening. Remember, he's met with attorneys general across the United States to discuss with them evidence that they have or might need to proceed against Mr. Trump if necessary. So I think Mr. Mueller, who strikes me as incredibly thoughtful and well prepared, is probably does have a plan in place for that contingency. And as we know, Mr. Mueller does not talk about the evidence he has or the plans he has to anyone other than his team. So we'll have to wait and see what happens if Mr. Trump makes that move.
On a broader question, in your prior life here, you were part of the Justice Department. And what we have seen here in the last week, we normalize everything nowadays because, every news cycle, there's one thing crazier than the next. I just spent 10 minutes talking about the very possibility of another government shutdown here. But that said, just take a minute and just put in context that we have a president and, more importantly, a party seemingly that's attacking the very Justice Department that the Law and Order Party, even subtracting politics out of this, has always held up. I mean, it is McCarthy-esque. I'm not being exaggerating, am I? I mean, we did cross a line here last week that I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime.
Yeah, Richard, it is genuinely frightening what is going on. It appears that Mr. Trump has the support of enough of the Republican base that he is able to basically keep the members of the House of Representatives and most of the senators in line behind him no matter what he does. And his attacks on the Justice Department and the FBI, to the degree that he's attacked them, it's really unprecedented. And because there are so many people who only watch Fox News and only listen to Trump and believe whatever he says, when he attacks the Justice Department and the FBI and tries to discredit them, then you've got an angry mob that is not going to respect the rule of law. And they've lined up behind President Trump, and he is taking a step toward a true autocracy in which he becomes the Mussolini of America. And that's a really frightening thing. It's a really frightening thing. But I am very heartened, very, very impressed by the fight that the minority party, the Democrats, are putting up on the House committee and in the Senate. I feel good about the way the director of the FBI is defending himself, and I feel good about the way Mr. Rosenstein seems to have dug in his heels and is willing to take this fight on. I have a great belief that in the long run, the Justice Department, the FBI, and justice with a capital J will triumph.
But the idea that we have to have a fight about not even I mean, we politicize everything. But it's also the process that Nunes did this by. Forget about what he said, and that, the emperor has no clothes when you read the report. But Roland, what he did, it offends any sense of justice.
It does. It was an entirely partisan attack on the Justice Department, and a baseless one, and the FBI, done, I think, simply to try to defend the president the only way that he can be defended, by smokescreen and false statements. So it's very troubling that the legislature, through Representative Nunes, is not functioning as it should. That's a frightening thing. We have a presidency that is not functioning as it should, and now we have at least significant parts of our legislature that are not functioning as they should. And we got to hope that the court system will function as it should when the subpoena, as it will come eventually, is tested there.
Well, I have a feeling we'll learn maybe sooner than later about the next shoe that will drop here. But Roland, I always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Richard.
You as well. All right, coming up next here, we're going to come closer to our neck of the woods. A key day in the Prococo corruption trial. The key government witness back on the stand. But today, it's Prococo's attorneys asking the questions, and they've said here, stay tuned for today. We're going to tell you just why. We'll get a live report from the courthouse with our own Dominic Carter. That next.